Hello, BookTube. We're back again for another installment of my never-ending library tour. We're on the west wall of the little book room, and for most of that time, at least for the last half dozen or so of these little installments, we've been dealing with my books on books, collections of reviews, essays, prefaces, publishing memoirs, stuff like that. And we are moving out of that a little. Maybe a lot. It could be that I don't even have these books all gathered together in one place. I think that's probably true. This whole room needs a little bit of an overhaul. So on this bottom shelf, for instance, I don't think there are any, or very few. So we'll go back to having the variety that you all love. What is this? Oh. Okay. All right. This first one is from National Geographic in 1927. This is from 1927. This is the National Geographic Book of Dogs. My people. This is my people. Has black and white photographs. Also has really nice color illustrations. And these are the faces of my life. These are the faces of my life. I have known and trained and loved and smooched with all of these people. All of them. And I can just look through this book and see all the different kinds. There's a pointer. Some of you have been watching this channel long enough to remember when I had a pointer. I didn't have a very good pointer. She was afraid of her own shadow and not aggressive except towards any other dogs. and most of you will only know her when she was very old. And then there's, of course, there's Irish Wolfhounds and Irish Setters and Bulldogs and Mastiffs. And also the picture that that contains most of my life. That one there. That is a Basset Hound in the foreground. I never thought I would have one of those. And then in the background is a beagle. And I've had more beagles than you have skin follicles. So this is the National Geographic Book of Dogs. No idea how many times they have updated this. This is from almost 100 years ago. Wow. Okay. Then this next one, what have we got here? Oh, great. A classic. A classic. This is Robert Bakker. This is the Dinosaur Heresies. This is his dinosaur book where he puts, it's illustrated. It's lovingly illustrated by the author. And he puts together all of his thinking on dinosaurs, how they moved, how they socialized, and especially the key factor that they were warm-blooded. And probably were more like we think of birds than we're like we think of lizards. And it's also, in addition to all of that, it's also an absolute delight to read. It really is one of those. I mentioned, I think, a long time ago when we started this room, that there's a small shelf full of dinosaur books. The ones that are the most impressive, the regular updated guides that have elaborate color illustrations and all the latest findings from the Gobi Desert and whatnot. As impressive as those things are, they don't make the small list of must-have dinosaur books, because their entire reason for being is the latest information, and they are outdated in 2 years. So I've had a lot of those. One of the best ones was Dinosauria. But I don't have any of them at the moment. Instead, what I have is considerations of dinosaurs, their place in our imagination, potted histories of the history of their discovery and the ideas about dinosaurs. I mainly have those. I revel in the dinosaur guides that I get every year. I get new ones every year, but I very seldom keep them, even the prettiest ones. But I keep the Dinosaur Heresies, absolutely. What is this next one? Oh, fantastic. All right, this is a great work of history. There will be history scattered throughout this room. This is John Reeder's book, Africa, Biography of a Continent. An incredible book. One of those books, like The Ancestor's Tale by Richard Dawkins, or The Gene by Sid Mukherjee. One of those books where there's something amazingly thought-provoking on literally every page of this book. And the trade paperback is ugly, and for some reason I didn't keep the hardcover when I fell in love with it originally. And so I had the trade paperback for the longest time, and it's not only ugly, but it's cheaply made, and it was bothering me. And so I would always think, well, sooner or later I'll see it for $1 at the Brattle, at the Brattle bookshop here in Boston or something like that. And then one day, years ago, I was in New York. This was when I regularly went to New York, when my previous 2 dogs, my girls, were not sick yet. They were in the prime of health, but they were older. They were 10 years old, so they didn't require someone. They didn't require a whole lot to take care of them. Someone could take care of them when I was gone. It was fairly easy to do. They were low maintenance because they weren't puppies anymore. They didn't need tons of activity, and they also weren't sick anymore. They weren't sick yet, so they didn't need the kind of care that you can't ask someone else to give them. So I routinely went to New York. I went once a month. And one time I was visiting my friend Sam in New York, and we were headed to the Strand bookstore, of course, as you do. When you go to New York, you go to the Strand bookstore. I have a small list of things that I like to do when I go to New York. I like to go to the American Museum of Natural History and just wander around and marvel. I like to bounce quarters off the rock-hard abs of Go-Go Boys. And I like to go to the Strand bookstore. And I like to wrap up the whole evening with cheap Chinese and cheap wine and nice book talk. And we were on our way to the Strand, and I was going on about, well, what are the chances that I'll see this thing on there? The Strand also has outside sale carts. And I don't know whether it was Sam who reminded me or I who reminded myself when I was in his company, but it suddenly the reminder was hanging there in the air that I don't actually need to wait to find a $1 copy, that I actually make a living wage. So when we got to the Strand, I walked in, I went to the Africa history section, found a copy, and bought it. So it was kind of weird. I don't do that often, even now. I'm very much in love with the thrill of the hunt for most things. The only standing temptation I have to break that mind frame is Book Depository. Because Book Depository has all those beautiful UK trade paperbacks, and they are my kryptonite. I love UK trade paperbacks. So, what is this next one? It's very bland. Oh, okay. It was very bland on the outside. But this is an old. When is this? This is probably 1957. This is an old black and white guide to Venice, just called Venice. That has just these beautiful old black and white photos of my second favorite city on earth. I mean, this is just here. I have plenty of other Venice books in this room. They should at least all be together. And I don't know why, like, for instance, I don't know why particularly I would have this one. I don't recall off the top of my head anything particularly charming or memorable about it. It just happens to be here. It goes to show you, even in this little book room, there is real estate that could be changed. I could probably free up an entire bookcase of space in here if I went through and pruned out stuff like that. Stuff. I mean, it's probably a worthy book, but it doesn't deserve a place in here. And if I could clear out a full bookcase in here, imagine. What if I were to clear out a full bookcase and then go into the other room that started this endless library tour and pare down the biographies and the histories so that the resulting number fit on that one bookcase? Then literally the essentials of my library would all be in this room. Anyway, it's something to think about in the new year. This next one is a historian we've seen before, believe it or not. This is the only one of his works that's in this room. All the others, even though I love him, all the others are out in the other room. That's not right. This is Ronald Sim, and this is his book History in Ovid, where he goes through the enormous body of work that we have from the Roman poet Ovid in doing what he does best, sifting through that work for hints and clues towards actual history. He sort of specialized in that, in finding nuggets of verifiable history where no one had ever thought to look, sitting there in plain sight. A fascinating book, especially if you love Ovid, as I do. Okay, this next one is by Robert Latham. This is a masterpiece. This is The Shorter Pepys. It doesn't look very short, I know, but this is Robert Latham's one-volume recension of the Diaries of Samuel Pepys, and it's the best one of those that exists. I know that feels like heresy for me because there is another volume. There have been many, 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 many one-volume abridgments of Pepys, but there's another volume that's in this room that I dearly love called Everybody's Pepys. But this is a scholarly thing. That was made for a general public with lots of fun illustrations. This is made for the person who wants to know Pepys without reading every word. There are quite a few diary entries over the 10 years that Pepys kept his diary. There are quite a few entries that are of no interest whatsoever, except maybe to an antiquarian. And this gets rid of them all and gives you fantastic introductions and notes to everything else. And I kept this volume. I kind of like it. It's kind of stately. I kept it even though that introduction, those notes, all of that abridgment, everything in it, that is the Penguin Classic Pepys. The Penguin Classic just took that book, the shorter Pepys, and made it into a Penguin Classic of Pepys, which is in this room. So that the exact text is twice in this room, which is a little odd. Okay. All right, that was not intended as a setup for this next book. This next book is an example of an exact text. We're talking about exact text that's duplicated many times in this room. This next one is not just in this room twice. It's in this room probably 6 times. And that is Bram Stoker's Dracula. This is an illustrated trade paperback with the French flaps. Very nice thing. With illustrations by Jay Lee, who he does the black and white spot illustrations, and also, if memory serves, some full page art as well. Jay Lee started off in comic books and shot to notoriety because the fan favorite writer and artist John Byrne took over. He launched the Submariner, one of the first characters that Timely Comics, before it became Marvel Comics, actually produced. They gave Submariner's had his own comic many times, 3 times, and the 4th time was John Byrne. John Byrne said to the powers that be at Marvel, I have an idea, all sorts of ideas, for Prince Namor, the Submariner. I want to do his book. And Byrne was on that book for a long time, and did some really, really interesting stuff. Some of those issues are just delightful. And then when he was announcing to everybody that he was going to leave, another artist had to be found, and Jay Lee came on and did amazing work, weird work, career-defining work, as a kind that set him apart as, okay, I am a comic book artist, but stress on the art, not on the comic. And he went on from there. I don't actually know what Jay Lee does now. Maybe he doesn't work in comics anymore. But I saw this used, and I couldn't pass up his illustrated edition of Dracula, even though I most certainly could pass up his illustrated version of Dracula. I have more copies of Dracula than I have holes in my head. But anyway, but oddly enough, when I talk about weak spots in this room, I think I'd probably keep every individual edition of Dracula that I have. We saw even the Mike Mignola, right? We saw his adaptation of Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. Uh-oh. What is it, baby? What's the matter? I'm talking to all your fans. I'm not talking about you. I swear. Miniature schnauzers. They have that face. They have that face of theirs. That bored, impressive face. So Frida just bursts into the door and then just stands there looking like she's expecting the whole room to snap to attention. So this next one is Thomas Palmer. This is a beautiful, fantastic book. I don't know that it's for all of you. I don't know that you have to have a fairly strong stomach, especially for the first 6 pages. But even after that, this is Landscape with Reptile. And it is a book about the rattlesnake population at the Blue Hills Reservation, which if you go to the highest point at the Boston Athenaeum, you can see the Blue Hills Reservation from there. And you can see Boston from the highest point in the Blue Hills Reservation. And there is a population of rattlesnakes that lives there, right here in the middle of, surrounded by suburban towns. And Palmer examines them to a fairly well, but the book expands from there. The book expands fantastically to be all about rattlesnakes in general, and also how predator snakes interact and are affected by the urban world. An amazing book, just an absolutely amazing work of natural history. There are a few of those in this room. They really, once again, ought to be all together. But I would compare this in its brilliance with something like, for instance, Revelation in the Flatwoods, which I know we will get to in here, which, again, takes an unlikely subject. When you get to big poetic things like this, you expect something like Barry Lopez's book of Wolves and Men, some big charismatic animal. And Landscape with Reptiles is about rattlesnakes, and Revelation in the Flatwoods is about turkeys. And yet, you don't know. You never know where a natural history book is just going to strike lightning like that. You just never do. Oh, okay. All right. Well, here we're back to form. This is William Jovanovich. This is Now Barabbas, the publisher, Jovanovich, who's a Harcourt Brace Jovanovich, back when that was. This is his book about publishing. So this has some occasional pieces and whatnot, and some reflections. I don't know what this is doing. Here, let's move this. It shouldn't be down there. It should be. It's clearly part of the rest of the collection. It's the only thing down here that we found so far. Okay, this is a really good book. This is Bernard Knox, the great Bernard Knox, and this is his book of occasional essays on the classics, which in booktube terminology is anything older than 100 years. But I can't help but, I mean, I'm perfectly happy to go along with that because I love my booktube. But in my mind, I can't help but think of it as the classics. When you mention the classics, you're talking about ancient Greece and Rome. And Bernard Knox is one of the greatest classicists of the last 100 years. And this is the oldest dead white European males. And it's terrific. It's the title notwithstanding, it's largely not him being playful. It's largely him being serious. And the essays are really good. Really, really good. Okay, and then we're at the end here. We're at the last one. This is by Roger Tory Peterson and James Fisher. This is an elaborately, beautifully illustrated edition of their book from 1955. This is Wild America. Let me show you some of the pictures in here. They're amazing, and they're all throughout. They're all throughout. Swamp pine. Some turtles. Can we find maybe another locale? The author Roger Tory Peterson goes all across America, looking at its wild spaces, and singing a note of doom almost everywhere he goes. Almost everywhere he sees no sustainability. He sees massive habitat loss and hunting and depredation, and doesn't think that the future. Oh, look at that! That is lovely. Doesn't think the future is sustainable, and that was 60 years ago. So it's fascinating to read for both those reasons. For yes, Bean, what is it, darling? You don't ordinarily pull the prima donna and object when I'm filming. That's obviously ordinarily not you. That would certainly have been the case every single day, every single video if I still had beagles. Oh my God. My boys would not have liked BookTube at all. Not at all. I would have been interrupted every single time. I got a little spoiled with that. Oh, look at that. There's some more now. I got a little spoiled with that because when I started BookTube, I had 2 old, sick dogs who never moved. So I was able to film to my heart's content without a certain someone bursting into the room repeatedly. But anyway, there you go. That is another work of natural history. That is a slightly more doom and gloomy work of natural history, but that wraps up this last shelf. So we are now done with this bookcase, and we'll just move on. And for those of you who are here for the thrills, that means the return of the footstool. So that'll be next time. I'll work up my courage. Thank you, BookTube.